Hello everyone, my name is Mrs. Hinde-Taylor and I work at Merchant Secondary, but I have a 3-year-old son who's very much into his books, and so I thought I'd read you if you are interested. This amazing book called Baby Aliens Got My Teacher by Pamela Butchart and illustrated by Thomas Flinton. I'll probably be reading it in chapters because it's quite long, but we'll see how we go. And please excuse me for the probably awful filming because I'm trying to read this and turn the pages and hold a phone. So, first chapter. I am not making this up. You know how sometimes you try to tell your mum and dad something really important and they say stuff like, "Ah, that's good," or "Go tell your dad," or "Don't be silly," or "Can't you see I'm on the toilet?" Like the time I found a crisp shaped exactly like Mrs. Cunningham who lives upstairs, and when I showed Mum she just said, "No thanks, you eat it." I obviously did not eat it. I put it in an envelope and carefully posted it through Mrs. Cunningham's letterbox, because that's what I would want someone to do if they found a crisp shaped exactly like me, also called a crisp twin. Anyway, one time, me and my friend Zach, who lives downstairs, ran home from school to tell Mum something extremely important about an incident that had happened that day, but she didn't listen. Even though we were all sweaty and red and out of breath from running, and Zach had fallen and cut his knee and everything, but Mum just gave me a look like I was making it up and said, "Don't be silly, Izzy," just like she always does. Mum always thinks I'm making stuff up. She says I have a wild imagination. And I say that I can't help it that weird stuff always happens to me. So I told Zach to tell her, because she never shouts at Zach or tells him he's making things up. One time I asked Mum why she shouted at me and not at Zach when we coloured in Dad's head when he was sleeping. And she said, "I'm not Zach's mum, but I am your mum, so I'm allowed to shout at you." So Zach told her about the incident at school, and guess what? Mum phoned his mum and she came up and she shouted at him right there in our living room in front of me and Mum and Dad and everything. I was worried she was going to start shouting at me too, but then I remembered the shouting rule. I felt bad for Zach. His mum shouted really loud and got a lot angrier than my mum did. When they left, Mum said it was because Zach's mum and Dad have split up, and this was the last thing Zach's mum needed, as she already had too much on her plate. I didn't really know what that meant, but then I remembered that last week at school dinners, Mrs. Kidd, the school force you to eat every scrap dinner monitor, wouldn't let me leave the table until I'd finished everything on my plate. And I felt sick because the stupid dinner lady had given me 5 ice cream scoops of shepherd's pie. They use the ice cream scoop for all of the food at our school. Zach says they don't even wash it before they serve the ice cream, and he knows that for a fact because his mum used to be our old dinner lady. Anyway, I hate shepherd's pie, so I couldn't finish it at all, and I got really angry because I wasn't allowed to leave the table, and I definitely had too much on my plate. So, anyway, Mum told me to go to my room and do my homework, but I said I couldn't until she listened to what had happened at school that day. But then her eyes started to get all twitchy, and that's what happens before she gets really annoyed and starts shouting things like, "That's it, I've had it, no holiday." So I just left it and said sorry, because I really, really want to go to Disneyland in the school holidays, as we didn't get to go on holiday last summer because Dad had to work. So I went upstairs, but I didn't go to my room. I sneaked along the hall into Mum and Dad's room and phoned Zach on his new mobile phone. Dad says that it's ridiculous that Zach has a mobile phone at his age, especially one that's better than his. Mum says that Zach's dad buys him lots of expensive things because he's not around as much as he was. I know Zach misses his dad, but we don't really talk about it because Zach doesn't like to. So, anyway, I phoned Zach from Mum's room and someone answered. But it wasn't Zach, it was somebody else. And I remembered that we'd left our school bags in school because we'd run away after the incident. The incident that Mum didn't want to hear about. So I slammed down the phone and dialed 999 because that's what the police officer that came to our school told us to do in an emergency. And this was an emergency. Okay, we will pick up on chapter 2 next time.